We begin this morning, though, with that message from President Biden urging Americans still living in Ukraine to leave the country as soon as possible.
The president spoke to our Lester Holt about the rising tensions in Eastern Europe and warned Americans that the situation could intensify at a moment's notice.
American citizens should leave now. We're dealing with one of the largest armies in the world. It's a very different situation, and things could go crazy quickly.
That warning comes as Russia ramps up its military exercises in Belarus and sends more warships into the Black Sea, actions that U.S. intelligence officials say could signal an imminent invasion. NBC News foreign correspondent Matt Bradley is in eastern Ukraine, and NBC News correspondent Aaron McLaughlin is back with us from the capital, Kyiv. Thank you both for joining us on this Friday. Aaron, let's start with you. So why has President Biden issued this new warning now, and what does it mean for any Americans still living in Ukraine?
Well, the U.S. government has been warning for days now that U.S. citizens should leave Ukraine, citing the COVID threat as well as the military buildup on three sides of the Ukrainian border. The president's words last night simply punctuating that warning. There's about 7,500 Americans registered with the U.S. Embassy here in Kyiv and perhaps thousands more unregistered. And the president's message to those citizens that you need to leave now, warning that in the event of an escalation, in the event of an invasion, the United States will not be sending troops into Ukraine itself to evacuate those citizens, instead staging the evacuation from nearby Poland. So should Russia invade, it will be up to those citizens to get themselves through the western portion of the country and out to the Polish border. You know, I've been speaking to U.S. citizens here. Many say that this is their home now. They've been living here for years, and they're adamant that they want to stay. They say they want to stay and fight for their second country, guys.
Now, Matt, we know there have been ongoing negotiations between Ukraine and Russia, with negotiators from France and Germany also weighing in on a possible diplomatic solution to the crisis. What more can you tell us about how those talks have been going?
Yeah, well, those talks were in Berlin, and they ended yesterday almost as soon as they started, and it was very frustrating for everybody involved. The diplomats who were there, and again, this is the meeting of what's called the Normandy 4, sometimes called the Normandy format, and it's trying to sort of revive this Minsk II agreement that really is just about resolving the situation in the eastern part of this country in the Donbass, not about even the larger issues around NATO and European security. But essentially, those diplomats, they couldn't even come together to agree on a statement about why they failed. It was just such a demoralizing experiment. And, you know, this has been a week of failed diplomacy. We saw also Liz Truss yesterday, the foreign secretary of the UK. She had a meeting with Russian diplomats that ended terribly, where essentially she was told that it was you know, sort of like the deaf leading the blind. It was insulting. And this is what we've seen time and time again from Russian diplomats and leaders, essentially talking down or diminishing Westerners, Western diplomats and leaders who are trying to resolve this situation. It doesn't leave much hope for a visit next week by Olaf Scholz. He's the Chancellor of Germany. He's kind of the last best hope that Western leaders or diplomats could be able to resolve this through diplomacy. He doesn't have necessarily the confidence of the U.S. or a lot of other Western capitals. So it's hard to see how his visit is necessarily going to improve things. Guys?
Aaron, I want to get into the optics behind Russia's latest war games around Ukraine. I know you recently sat down with Ukraine's former defense minister who spoke to you about how Russian President Vladimir Putin is approaching this entire situation. What more can you tell us about that?
Yeah, that's right, Joe. Right now, he said that there are three pressure points in this crisis, essentially. You have the military exercises going on in Belarus right now. That's just hours from the capital where I am now in Kyiv. That is to the north of the country. Then you have the ongoing crisis and war in the eastern portion of the country. And then, in somewhat of a new element or new development this week, you have this crisis playing out in the Black and Azov Seas. Now, we've seen, according to the Russian media, about 140, they say, warships and support vessels undertaking military exercises. The Ukrainian government this week claiming that those warships are blockading the Black Sea, which is a huge problem for Ukraine because its economy is heavily reliant. In fact, 95% of all exports leave through those ports in the south. It's seen as a huge problem. And the former defense minister telling me that he believes that the Russian president is simply testing the situation to see what he can get away with. Take a listen.
What Putin is always doing he's testing waters. So he constantly looks what is the attitude to his actions and what works. If he sees, for example, that he blocks half of the Black Sea and nothing happens, he will continue blocking. So it's just a matter of the response. He looks at the response.
Now, in terms of that response, experts say that the best thing the West can do right now is to continue with the pressure, which includes lethal aid, that diplomatic pressure, as well as sanctions. Guys, back to you.
Now, let's talk more about that. These latest moves by Russia. How has the U.S. responded? Are we sending more troops to Eastern Europe or more resources to Ukraine and other countries to prepare for a potential invasion?
Yeah, all of that is ongoing. I mean, as far as we can tell, nothing has changed in that U.S. posture. There's that $200 million package of lethal aid, and that's been progressively going on. There's something nearly 10 shipments have already been sent and landed in Kyiv. And then, of course, there's that massive troop movement of 3,000 troops that are now moving toward the east, both from elsewhere in Europe and from the U.S. So this is ongoing, and whether or not that's going to change, it's hard to know, because the fact of the matter is a lot of these moves are seen as deliberately provocative by Moscow, even though, from the point of view of the West, all of these drills and practicing all of this is seen as deliberately provocative. If the U.S. does any more, it could risk inflaming the situation even further. Guys?
Matt Bradley, Aaron McLaughlin, thank you both.
Now, Nevada residents are waking up this morning with fewer COVID restrictions in place. The mask mandate there has been dropped, joining a growing list of Democrat-led states that are easing up as cases drop. The governor of Nevada says the decision is effective immediately, regardless of someone's vaccination status. But even as about a dozen states loosen restrictions, the CDC is doubling down on its stance, saying removing mask mandates is a premature move.
But at this time, we continue to recommend masking in areas of high and substantial transmission. That's much of the country right now in public indoor settings. And so we're, of course, taking a close look at this in real time.
And this all comes as new COVID numbers show COVID-related deaths are up nearly 9%, as you can see there on your screen. NBC News medical contributor Dr. Uche Blackstock joins us now for more on this. She's an emergency medicine physician and the CEO of Advancing Health Equity. Doctor, good morning. So these mask mandates, I mean, they can be confusing, especially with so many states dropping them seemingly overnight. How can we make sense of such a swift change in mask guidance, especially when it goes against what the CDC is still saying? Does this mean we're nearing the end of the pandemic stage?
Savannah, I know that's such a good question, and I can understand the public being confused because they're getting, conflicting advice. What the CDC is saying, I fully support right now. 99% of U.S. counties have substantial to high transmission levels, and that's where masks should be worn and recommended in indoor places. And so, I think at this point, and it shouldn't be, but people are going to have to be aware of what's happening locally in their communities, going on their local departments of public health to see what the transmission levels are in their area. And if they're high, I would strongly consider to continue wearing those masks.
And Doctor, now I want to ask you about those numbers I mentioned in my intro and that screen everybody saw that shows that cases are pretty dramatically down. But then we've got this stat now that COVID deaths are rising, up almost 9%. I mean, I think we've all been feeling that, things are getting better. But what do you make of those numbers? What does this tell us about our fight against COVID at this moment? How can that be the case that cases are down while deaths are up?
Well, Savannah, I will say those numbers are to be expected. We know that hospitalizations and death are what's called a lagging indicator. They take a few weeks to increase after that increase in cases. And death is what we call a lagging indicator. Sometimes it takes 4 to 6 weeks after a case for deaths to peak. And that's what we're seeing right now. So although cases are going down, deaths are still going up. We're going to see deaths start going back down probably in the next few weeks.
All right, that's a good reminder there, Doctor. And while I've got you, I do want to get a viewer question in. This is from Ashley. She writes, the FDA authorized a third dose of the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines for immunocompromised individuals. This was not considered a booster, but rather part of their initial series. Should those individuals receive a booster, and if so, when? So it seems to me there, Doctor, like she's asking about a potential fourth shot if you're immunocompromised. What do you say to that?
Actually, great question. And yes, CDC is recommending a fourth dose. And that should be done now 3 months after that last dose. And that's for moderately to severe immunocompromised people who have had organ transplants, people who are on chemotherapy, or people with advanced HIV infection or other immunocompromised individuals.
All right, Dr. Uche Blackstock, thank you so much. Great answer there. And Ashley, you got your direct answer. And if you have a question for one of our doctors like Ashley did, please let us know. They are ready to help you. Email us at morningnewsnow@nbcuni.com with your questions, and let us know if you want to stay anonymous or get a shout out on the show like Ashley.
Roughly 3,000 city workers are at risk of being fired in New York today. That would be one of the biggest workplace reductions in the U.S. because of a COVID-related mandate. It's estimated another 1,000 workers could also be terminated today if they do not provide proof of their second COVID vaccine dose. But it's important to point out that this unvaccinated group represents less than 1% of the city's total workforce. Now, despite pleas to overturn the vaccine policy, Mayor Adams says it's more important to make sure everyone is safe against COVID and all its variants.
The responsibility is clear. We said it. If you hire and you get this job, you have to be vaccinated. If you are not following the rules, you are making that decision. You're making the decision that you're not going to follow the rules of getting vaccinated. And that's a decision that they're making. I want them to stay. I want them to be employees of the city, but they have to follow the rules that were put in place before my administration.
WNBC reporter Jessica Cunnington joins us now from City Hall with the latest on these protests. So, Jessica, good morning. What are you hearing from workers about this vaccination deadline?
Well, it's been the same tune for the past few months, Joe. Hundreds of unvaccinated workers have been protesting this mandate ever since it was put into place back in October. And they've been protesting right up until the end. Back on Monday, hundreds of people shut down the Brooklyn Bridge to protest this mandate as well. Many people walking and marching with them were vaccinated themselves. They just do not believe that the shot should be mandated. They believe it should be a personal choice. A lot of these workers were hoping, really, that there would be some kind of last minute change, some kind of negotiations before this deadline came. But here we are today. And as you said, less than 3,000 workers now could be out of a job by the end of today, Joe.
So we heard Mayor Adams say this decision came before his administration took over. Remind us, why did Bill de Blasio put the mandate in place, and how effective has it been?
Yeah, so this was back in October, and it was former Mayor Bill de Blasio that put this into place in October. And really his reasoning behind this was that these city workers really were facing COVID head on throughout the pandemic. You're talking about EMTs, firefighters, police officers. Many of them got COVID themselves. So once the vaccine came, they said, all right, with this, we're going to try to keep them safe. They're going to try to keep everyone else safe. The people here in the city who are interacting with those public-facing city workers. So he mandated the shot for those workers. Anyone who didn't get one dose before November 1st were placed on leave, and many of those people today are going to be terminated.
So, Jessica, can we expect to see any more protests later today? And what does all this mean for the workers who no longer have a job because of this?
Yeah, it's been a long road for them. Again, they've been protesting for about 3 months, and they're going to be back at it again today. They're going to be here at City Hall around 11, but starting in separate places in separate boroughs. We're seeing these flyers, kind of going around social media, people sharing them, making their voices heard, and making it known that they will be here to now protest not just the mandate, but now protesting the terminations of their fellow workers or themselves who are without a job. Again, less than 3,000 of them who have refused to get vaccinated until this point. And what it means for them, I mean, they've been protesting this for several months now. They, many of them kind of feel defeated. They lost their livelihood. They have obviously families, and some of them have been on the job for many years. But so many of them have also been seeing the change, especially recently with the rollbacks of some of these COVID requirements, most notably with the mask situation. That was just a big announcement here in New York for this week. So kind of watching that happen, but then still experiencing this today, losing their job because they are not vaccinated. There's still some of them who have hope, and that is why they'll be here today protesting those terminations. Joe.
Again, those phasing termination make up less than 1% of the total workforce here. Jessica Cunnington, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Time now for a check on your Morning News Now weather.
NBC's Bill Cairns joins us with the latest forecast for Super Bowl weekend, where it's basically summer, right, Bill?
Yeah, easily summer, right? Yesterday was mid to upper 80s in some spots. I didn't see any 90s, but we got close. And great Friday morning to you guys and everyone else. So we have heat advisories that are up right through the weekend. It looks like the heat wave in Southern California will last until Sunday, and then it will get cooler and kind of back to what you'd expect normally for February. So keep this in mind when I go through some of these temperatures. The all-time February record high temperature, San Francisco there for Thursday is 78 degrees. So I don't think we're going to quite get there, but it'll be close in a few spots. San Francisco today around 71. LA about 85 today. So we're going to get close in Palm Springs to that 90-degree temperature. High officially forecast is 89 degrees. Tomorrow will be a little bit warmer in San Fran. We're calling it almost into the mid-70s. You notice we are about mid-80s from LA to Palm Springs to San Diego. This is very warm, near record highs for even San Diego. And then as we head through the end of the weekend into next week, you notice that we do cool things down. LA Super Bowl Sunday forecast 86 degrees for the high temperature, but then it will get cooler as we go throughout the afternoon when the game begins. San Diego, same for you. It looks like Monday, Tuesday, much cooler conditions. So for the actual big game itself at SoFi Stadium, it'll be about 84 earlier in the day, but by kickoff, which is around 3:30 Pacific time, it'll be down to about 80 degrees. So we'll call it sunny and warm. Should be pretty comfortable for the fans. It should be excellent for the players. Shouldn't be, not going to be like 90s and humid like you'd get in South Florida or something like that. So you really shouldn't see the players struggling in this. Should be a very, very enjoyable weather game for just about everyone. And if it is 80 at kickoff, by the way, it would be the third warmest Super Bowl of all time. It does not look like we're going to challenge number one there, which was 84 degrees back in the 70s. So for today, guys, it's a beautiful day, almost coast to coast, the exception being the northern plains. That's where we're going to deal with some cold and some snow. We'll talk more about that next hour. But enjoy this afternoon. D.C., 64 and sunny. In the middle of February. It doesn't happen often.
No kidding. Good for them.
All right. Thanks, Bill. See you in a little bit.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.